Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. I'm your host, Rheologist, and joining me again this week is Capping with Candice. Candice here. And Candice, before we go into this week's stakes races, I thought we'd quick take a look back at what transpired in the mountain last week. Kind of give you your thoughts on the West Virginia Derby and the Whitney.
I thought they ended up being two pretty good races. The West Virginia Derby for me it was pretty much exactly what I wanted to see. I really wanted to see Tapiture kind of step up in there, and we got kind of the duel we wanted between him and Candy Boy. And I thought both of them, all in all, ran winning races. I mean, Candy Boy definitely had the widest trip in the field. There's no doubt about that. And he just always fights on, and I think that he'll move forward off that effort. It's so tough when you look at his record because there's so many seconds, but I don't think he's a horse who hangs. He just doesn't always quite get there in time, but I thought Candy Boy was very, very good in there. Tapiture had lots of troubles. Rosie Napravnik after the race said that he lost the shoe early on, which made sense because we saw something really weird happen in the first turn. I'm not sure if it happened there, though. And then, was blocked out late and still came on to, just get his nose down. But, for me, those two were standouts. And to be honest, I thought that Candy Boy and Tapiture, to me, ran more visually impressive races than from what I saw in the other three-year-old stakes we saw 2 weeks ago. So, just because they ran in West Virginia, I wouldn't discount them, coming in with the big boys, whether we see them in the Travers or wherever, Pennsylvania Derby and such. As far as the Whitney, Moreno was, he was let go on the lead, able to get the lead early. That's when he's his most dangerous. I don't think he ran a slow race by any means. I think a lot of people said that he crawled in the lead. I'm not sure that was the case, but you just can't let him go out front like that. Palace Malice, I can't even say he no-showed. It was just bad. It's one thing if he would have went there and ran a really flat race, but he was being hard-ridden from the start. I mean, he just did not have it at all. So it'll be interesting to see where he comes forward from there. All in all, I thought two good races, two competitive races, and as we go through the year, it's just kind of putting those pieces together of who's trending upward and who perhaps we need to take another look at when they come up to race again.
Should be interesting watching them move forward, and both the three-year-old division and the older division kind of just have a lot of chess pieces right now. I don't think you can say any horse is really better in either division. This week we're going to kind of take a myriad of races. We'll start off, not too often that we start with a turf race at Saratoga, but kind of a great name, Fourstardave, and a good competitive field.
It is. I mean, it's a small field, but it's who you would expect to be in this race. Obviously, Samwise Dan, who's not back yet after his health problems, but we've got pretty much everyone else you would expect to run in this type of a race. Silver Max is one who, so many times has been the bridesmaid, and, possibly maybe is this his chance to kind of take a step forward. Personally, for me, I don't like him. I think he runs his best when he's really left alone out front, and I think that the presence of Syed is, really going to hinder him in that respect. I think he'd have to really be pushed early to get a clear lead here from Syed, and either way, I don't really like him in that kind of a spot. Seek Again is really interesting. Ran second to Wise Dan in his first start of the year, and then finished third behind Real Solution and Kaigun in the Manhattan. So definitely a consistent type. I do think this is a bit short, though. He really strikes me as more of a 9-10 furlong horse, so I'm not sure that I'm completely sold on him on this much of a cutback. But for me, I landed on Jack Milton. This is a horse who's proven at this distance. With Silver Max and Syed in here, I think he's going to, get a little bit of a pace up front to close into. And, to me, he's the fastest at this distance, as well as having the tactical speed that you'd need in this type of a field. So Jack Milton for me, Pletcher Castellano on the turf at Saratoga.
Silver Max, despite, he's not a grade 1 horse. What he is, he's kind of a tweener. When you actually look at his overall record, he's got a lot better record than a lot of big name horses. He's 50% wins, 12 for 24, It's just that at that highest level of racing, his record goes down a little bit. That last win was accomplished over a lot weaker field. I wasn't impressed with it. Like I say, he'll win, and he wins his 50% of his races, but I'm not sure this is the best spot. Syed last year showed a lot of speed, and I think this horse has got a little bit of talent. So I will be interested to see what he does, because this is the type of horse that if he were to run a big effort on Saturday, I think people would put him right at the top of the U.S. contenders for the Breeders' Cup Mile very easily, where I would have a lot harder time putting Silver Max at the top of the U.S. Milers, just because I've kind of been there, done that with him for the last couple of years. I ended up going with Seek again. I considered Jack Milton just because that last race was a flat race. He shipped out west. That's a tough ship. There's a reason why nobody ever does it. He tried it, got beat. Now he's back east and back on his home track. But Seek again, I thought, made a premature move the last race, and I thought he just moved too soon. I think he's going to get his pace to run at with Syed and Silver Max, and I would say, at 7-5, 8-5, I think Seek again is actually the class of this field and could run a pretty strong race in this spot. So Jack Milton would probably be my second choice. Anybody else that you wanted to have a note on or anything?
No, I think we kind of see the race the same, just flip. Mine would be Jack Milton over Seek again, and it sounds like you're the reverse.
For the Gardenia Stakes at Ellis Park, this is kind of, Ellis Park kind of went to a boutique meet a couple of years ago where they cut back on the number of racing days, but this race has kind of survived as their signature race of the meet. It's for older fillies, and we have a horse that picked up a nice win a couple of races back, Molly Morgan, at Churchill Downs. How did you see this race unfolding in the Gardenia?
Molly Morgan, you have to, maybe take the first look at, because she, clearly here exits the classiest races. And like you said, she did win two back at Churchill in the Fleur-de-Lis. Though I'm a little bit skeptical, the track that day was playing towards closers, so potentially that helped her a bit, even though she did win by a wide margin. And really when you look at her record, that race was almost kind of like a freak performance. She's never really come close to that as far as speed goes, and I'm a little bit skeptical that she's going to be able to run back to that. And if she doesn't run back to that, then it's a lot more competitive race. For me, the horse who really interests me here is Quiet Success. This is the Tom Amos Successful Appeal. She just is really consistent, albeit at lower levels, but still in stakes, just not graded stakes. But this is a horse who time and time again seems to, at least lately, seems to be kind of stuck on the front end of some pressured paces, and so hasn't quite had the easiest of trips. She can drop back a little bit, not a ton, but just slightly off the pace. But for me, I really like her at this distance. I think she's better at a mile than some of the others in here. There's quite a few in here who, really are just sprinters, and, I question them at a mile, but that isn't the case for Quiet Success. Molly Morgan, I think, probably wants further. This might be too short for her, to be honest. But for me, I saw the race between the two of them and just opted to go with Quiet Success at, what'll certainly be a bigger price. Molly Morgan is 3-1 on the morning line. I think that's going to definitely come down quite a bit. Tom Amos does well at Ellis, and, I just see it like a steady work tab and just on the very slight cutback. Her last race was a nice one. She dueled up front and then, just was outstayed just in the ever so slightest. That was also over a muddy track, and there is potential for weather here. So, it just kind of seems like everything's in line for Quiet Success to run a nice one here. And, so I'm going to take her in this spot.
Yeah, I thought the speed of the race might be Livi Makenzie, and I considered taking her as kind of the sprinter stretching out. I've had good luck with her in the past, but it just seems like a mile may be just a shade too long for her. But I do think she's in sharp form, and she has faced some top-notch sprinters. And a lot of times people kind of forget that when you're facing fast sprinters and then you stretch out, and really, let's face it, this is kind of a moderate bunch of routers. There's nobody with sharp speed. It wouldn't surprise me if Livi Makenzie goes wire to wire. I ended up going with a horse called Frivolous. A lot of times at this meet, trainers specifically are what I call Ellis trainers. Like, they just seem to win there. or a few different owners are right around from that area. And this has got Victoria Oliver. She's got 2 horses in this race. 3 back, I thought a really good effort at Keeneland. And I just think at 5, 6 to 1, I think she's going to be that price. I think the trainer fits. It gets a new jockey. I like seeing a jockey switch when I think a horse is well meant. I'm a firm believer that when you look back at the end of the year and you start writing down all of the horses that pay 10, 14, $16, one of the things I notice in common is many times there's a jockey switch. And it's not that I'm not a believer that any jockey's better than another jockey normally. I just think it's good to switch things up. I just think sometimes horses get stale with the same riders, and same riders will do the same tactics. So Miguel Mena, he's capable. He's won some races with some grade 2 and grade 3 races, and to me, he's kind of a hard-working jock, and I just think this horse is well met, and I like the jock switch, and I like the trainer, and so I guess that's how I see it is Livi Makenzie, the speed, possibly finishing second, but I'm going to go with Frivolous as my winner.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. One who I wanted to give a mention to, just because, like I said, there is potential of weather, and this isn't a horse who I think is a wind threat by any means, but if we do get a downpour and it is a sloppy track, take note of the horse on the outside, Ocean Birdie. She has a few really visually impressive wins over sloppy tracks. I mean, definitely against lower company than this, but some horses just kind of freak over the slop, and this might be one of them to include underneath at a bigger price if we get a downpour.
Now, my Midwestern roots, I'm going to call this what I called this race for many years because I'm from Minnesota. For me, it was always the La Jolla, and you're telling me it's got a different name.
La Jolla.
Come
Oh,
on, you mean it's not La Jolla?
it's not La Jolla,
Oh,
no.
man. Well, what do you see in this race?
I was a little bit surprised, honestly, that this field was as short as it was. I mean, I wasn't expecting a big field by any means, but this was a little bit smaller than I was certainly hoping for. But we do get, kind of the big ducks that you'd expect as far as the 3-year-old turfers in California go. Um, for me, dare I say, I really like Schoolofhardrocks in this race. This is a race that to me is devoid of any sort of pace up front for the most part, and I think that he might get a soft lead up front, and if he does, he's very dangerous, I think, on the cutback. I mean, it was clear the American Derby was just too far for him, but despite that, I did think he ran a pretty nice race there. So, Schoolofhardrocks, your boy from the Kentucky Derby Trail, on the cutback here, 8.5 furlongs on the turf. I really like him.
Yeah, I ended up going with Enterprising. I really think this is a 2 horse race. Enterprising has danced all the dances. He obviously likes the turf. He's ran some good races on the synthetic as well. But Schoolofhardrocks, the interesting thing was in the American Derby, again, another horse that's shipped, and I just think I think too many times people say the class and all this. There's a reason why a lot of horses never ship. I mean, that horse had an 8-to-1 morning line the last time, was hammered down to the favorite. There's a reason why that money was on him. And then when you look at 2 races back when he won by 4 after the sprint prep, I mean, this horse obviously has the turf breeding. He obviously has some talent. I just say that last race he didn't ship. Now he's back on his home court, and you could go either way. I think I kind of like races like this. Usually how I play a race like this one, I really think it's a 2 horse race. I just play both of them in doubles, both of them in pick threes, and to me, you don't have to spread, yet you're not stuck with a 3 to 5 horse either.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it, for me a lot more fun betting race because you have 2 clear choices instead of, one horse who's being hammered down. I completely agree that it's a 2 horse race. I think pace is going to determine it, and I'm just not so sure Enterprising is going to get the pace that he needs to go against what I think is a pretty sharp Schoolofhardrocks. Like you said, he was absolutely hammered in the American Derby for kind of no reason. I mean, yeah, he had ran well in California, but you couldn't say that the class of his races to that point were anywhere near some of the others in the field. So people knew something for sure going into that. And like I said, he ran, even though he finished 4th, it was a much nicer than it appears 4th. So Schoolofhardrocks for me over Enterprising.
Let's quick digress before we go to the Prairie Meadows Juvenile. So this week is kind of a big week because you see School of Hard Rocks and Enterprising cutting back to a mile for 3-year-olds. Bobby's Kitten goes to a mile for 3-year-olds. I mean, until we really know the status of Wise Dan, it's been a while. But back in the day, horses like Lure and Manila and even Golden Cove and stuff, they came over and won the Breeders' Cup Mile as a 3-year-old. Do we have some 3-year-olds that are capable of maybe if Wise Dan isn't in there? Because obviously, I don't know. He's kind of a one-trick pony. He's fast. Yeah, it's a fast trick, but I don't know. It's been a long time since somebody's wired the mile. It seems like somebody always corrals him in.
I think we have plenty of talent. I think on raw talent level, Bobby Kitten is the most talented, but I worry about him with obviously. I think that could be a disaster potentially for both of them if they're both in that field. Global View to me is the one who I would really be looking forward to for that race. I'm interested in seeing, him show up again after, clearly the Belmont Derby was too far. And, that's going to be the interesting thing, I think, for this 3-year-old group is so many of them ran in the American Derby or the Belmont Derby, and for most of them, it was just too far. So, keep an eye on them. Pretty much all will be on the cutback, you would think. So, that'll be interesting to see going forward. But I definitely think, that's a race that's really tough as far as international horses go. But as far as the American group goes, I do think the raw talent, now that Wise Dan isn't really around, is in the 3-year-olds. And, it's just going to be a matter of time when we start seeing them go against older if they can hang.
All right. Well, I tried to lobby for an entire week to have the Minnesota Derby as our 4th race, but you said, nope, we're going to Altoona, we're going to the Prairie Meadows Juvenile, so you got your wish here. I thought it could just as good as any, to me, I mean, the pedigrees and the competitiveness of the field is a solid juvenile stakes in Altoona, Iowa.
Yeah, I definitely agree. This is kind of a fun little race. It's, we don't go to Prairie Meadows often, though we've been there a couple times lately. And I did definitely find this to be a competitive race. I think this is going to be one of those fields where it's like everybody's between like, maybe you have 4 or 5 horses between like 3-1 and 7-1 or something. And those are fun. I definitely like taking part in betting wise in those types of races. For me, I think that the interesting thing is maybe the more proven horses or the fastest horses are the ones who are going to be right on the lead, and that could potentially set up for, well for a horse coming from off the pace. For me, I settled on a horse named Goo Bird. This is a guy who, his first time out, he didn't really do that much. He clearly needed the run his first time running, but then in his second race, it was at Ellis over the turf going a mile, and if you haven't seen the replay, it's probably one of the more crazy replays I've seen in a long time. But long story short, he hopped to the break. He was blocked out a little bit and was forced to settle far behind everybody else. And he really closed into what was a pretty slow pace. I can't really count him as the winner, even though he did win, because the way he won was that Fire Spike had a clear lead by a few lengths and then got spooked and almost went over the rail, and so then he was able to pass him. So he wouldn't have really won the race, but he has proven over this distance, which nobody else is, and regardless, even if you count him as finishing second there, he did still close into what was a very slow pace, and I think he'll be, aided much more from a pace perspective here. This is for Kenny McPeak. And, I like him back on the switchback to dirt. There's lots to like about this guy, and, while I'm, potentially most worried about Lucky Player, who's a look at the lucky for Steve Asmussen, I think that horse will go off favored, and, if it gets a little bit chippy up front, it could be tough for him. So I ultimately sided with Goo Bird over Lucky Player.
I thought it was a nice race. I took a look at some race replays, and one of the things that's interesting, looking at Lucky's got a big crop of foals, and this is his first crop. So they always try to get that first stakes winners because then they want to be able to update the Keeneland sales catalog. So I think that horse was definitely meant for this race. Steve Asmussen, as you mentioned, ships in a horse, and one of the things that despite just also in addition to being a good trainer, I think really what the key for Asmussen's operation has been is spotting horses. And I mean, you saw it on Monday. I mean, he'll run a horse in the Manitoba Derby. He'll run a horse at Zia Park. He'll run a horse in the Sunland Derby, and now he's got one here at Prairie Meadows. And I think that's what. And he ran one in the Mountain last Saturday. So
Mhm.
I mean, he'll kind of just he really that's where I think his expertise really is at is he'll take a Grade 3 horse and find a Grade 3 spot for him, or take a good juvenile or early developing 3-year-old and put him into a nondescript derby just to get the black type. So I ended up going with a horse for a couple of reasons. Uh, Not as big of a name trainer. James DeVito has been having an unreal year at Arlington Park for a couple of years with first-time starters, and I'm going with Recount. Um, kind of ran away with the field, was bet down to 5-2 in his debut. I love the fact when they go from poly to real dirt. I think there's a bounce effect and it's usually a forward bounce. Sharp trainer. He took a couple of 3-year-olds last year and won at Gulfstream Park in January at nice odds. So I think this horse will be one of those horses that's 4-1 and maybe 9-2-ish. And I think if Recount is good, I could see him winning this race by a couple of lengths. And if he doesn't win, well, you know what? At least I still got the 9-2 on him, and took a, you can't strike out unless you take a swing. So I'm taking a swing at 4-1 on Recount.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely an interesting one to me in this spot. One thing I will say is that in his debut, there was a slight front-runner bias on the synthetic that day, so that could have potentially helped him a little bit there. And like you say, his trainer is very good with first-time starters, but because of that, I'm, maybe a little put off in that I'm not sure how much he's going to improve from a speed perspective second time out of the gate.
Next week, the Arlington Turf Course will be in play, and we plan on previewing 3 or 4 of those races. And I know you've lined up a special guest for us. I think you've called in a fireman to help us out.
Yeah, we need all the help we can get, I guess.
And of course, in addition, a lot of people think that it's just the Arlington Million, but they get the Beverly D, you get the 3-year-old race, and this year it seems like even more than normal. We've got a few more, especially top European fillies pointing for that Beverly D.
Yes, we definitely have some good European fillies pointing for the Beverly D. Even for the Million, I think in the bar notes today it was all but confirmed that Trading Leather's coming over. He's a legitimate Group 1 horse over in England as well. So I think, both those fields in particular have come up very, very strong and, very diverse fields as far as the locations of the contenders.
Well, one of the things, I do like the fact that Side Glance is back for the 4th straight year. For a couple of reasons. I mean, I like horses that, he ran in out east and then he runs over in Dubai, and he's 7 years old, but this is his 4th time he'll be running in the Arlington Million. And it, since he usually kind of runs his race, it kind of does give you a horse to kind of gauge against. Like if he were to win this race, we'd all immediately, I think, decry that something weird went wrong. Yet if he runs 3rd, I think he's a good gauge.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense since, but I do also like horses like that when they get older, they kind of stick to their schedule. I feel like as far as, for us for handicapping, it makes it a little bit easier to know, like, where some of these horses are pointed for. And we talked about that on the preview day even, that there were a couple older horses running that day that were just completely out of form, but you knew in that spot they were well met because they go there every year.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're looking forward to that. Of course, a couple of weeks away, we'll be painting the Canoe and the Travers, and then also the Pacific Classic. It looks like that's got a 12-horse field, and both Game On Dude and Shared Belief had workouts this week, so they're both on track for the Pacific Classic. That's going to do it for another edition of Down to the Wire. Next week, we have a special guest, and we'll talk about the Arlington Million on Down to the Wire.